Hey guys, Dr. Nathan Thompson here, and I want to go over a common test that we run on our patients known as the food allergy test. And I want to go over the big 4 foods that I want you to avoid, even if you don't have a specific allergy to it, and I'll show you why. And then some of the next steps that you do beyond food allergy testing. Now, prior to going over any kind of testing with any of the patients, I always make a statement and I say, please don't shoot me. I'm only the messenger. And the reason why is a lot of times we can get a little bit emotional when we see the foods that we're having an immune system reaction to and the foods that we should be avoiding. So just remember, I didn't run the test, and I'm just delivering the sometimes good news, because we're finding sources of inflammation, but sometimes people attach a lot of emotion to food, so it can be some bad news for them. So for the food sensitivity testing or food allergy testing, I want to explain to you what these specific tests actually mean and kind of the reason why we run these tests on a lot of people. The first one that I want to go over with you is I want to go over the IgE food allergy test first. Now, there's a difference between an IgE reaction and the other test, which is an IgG reaction, and that is just actually which part of the immune system is actually getting involved. For example, an IgE type of reaction, this is known as your innate immune system response. This is kind of like when you have an allergic reaction to something. This is kind of like what you would know as anaphylaxis. This is like, for example, a kind of response if you would get a sliver in your finger. So you have white blood cells that are just like general white blood cells that are always circulating throughout your body and always attacking things that it sees as foreign. So even though it can start to break down the splinter, it can also cause a lot of peripheral tissue damage as a result. So anything with an IgE would be what we would know as, like, a lot of people associate with things like peanut allergies, for example. So this is going to be a very general and a strong type of immune system response to those specific foods. So you can see that it actually is measuring things like almonds, soybeans, corn, eggs, cow's milk, peanuts, shrimp, and wheat. Now when you go onto the left side, this is your IgG. And your IgG reaction is much more specific. This is known as your acquired immunity. So this is a part of the immune system that gains memory, and each time you're exposed to a specific antigen, like a protein in a food or a virus or a bacteria, because it retains that memory, it has a lot more very specific and a lot quicker response to it. So just remember is that you need a healthy functioning immune system to actually be able to respond to these foods. But when the immune system reacts to these, it creates an associated inflammatory response, which is what we want to limit as much as possible inside of the body. So you can see on this test, which is mine, for example, you can see that I react to almonds, casein, cashew nuts, coconuts, egg whites, kiwi, cow's milk, peanut, sesame, and tuna. And a lot of times we get really emotional with these foods that we aren't supposed to have anymore. But just remember, when you're looking at this test, even though I am avoiding these 10 foods, when you look down at the bottom, you can actually see all of the different foods that I don't react to, which are going to be perfectly fine for me. So the goal is when it comes to food sensitivity testing, these things I am avoiding in order to allow the immune system just to be able to recover. And then I'm replacing a lot of the same types of foods with what I can have at the bottom. Now, just remember this principle. It's called the Swiss watch principle. And the reason why this is so important is because the whole entire body works as one unit. If you open up the back of a Swiss watch, you see all of these gears here. And if you open it up and you ask the person the question, well, which gear is important? They would say all of them, because even if you remove the smallest gear, the whole watch is not going to keep time. And it's the same thing with the body. We treat the whole body as a whole entire unit. Now, obviously, we want to always be dealing with the nerve system with chiropractic and spinal correction, because the nerve system is actually what is controlling everything inside of the body. We think of it as the central computer. And then off of the nerve system, as that begins to function, you have the circulatory, your hormone system, your digestive system, your bones, your skin, your immune system, your muscles, your lungs, your blood vessels, your arteries, your heart. And so all of these different things work together to create health. Now, I always give the example that when I ask people, hey, does your big toe control your heart? And a lot of times people will say, no, it doesn't. And then I say, give me a hammer, I'll smash your big toe, and then let's check your heart. And you'll notice if I smash your toe, your heart rate actually increases as a result. So we know that this whole entire body runs together. This is why if you have any kind of inflammation that's taking place, for example, in the digestive system, how this can actually affect your hormones, like your thyroid or your fertility hormones, how problems in the digestive system can affect things like skin, like rashes or eczema. So this is why we're looking at the whole entire system, making sure we're fixing all of those things so that everything can work the way that it's supposed to. And when you look at it, inflammation is really the root to nearly all disease. For example, when you have inflammation in the cardiovascular system, this is going to produce things like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart disease, stroke. What you see here is plaquing, and a lot of times people associate plaquing with just cholesterol laying down because you're getting older. Plaquing and things like that is a direct result of inflammation, and in fact most people think if they have high cholesterol, rather than find the cause of it, they just think they need to be on a cholesterol lowering drug. And what's interesting is that most drugs never get to their cause as far as why you're having the issue in the first place. And in fact, this comes from Lipitor, which is one of the most popular cholesterol lowering drugs, and they actually admit that Lipitor has not been shown to even prevent heart disease or heart attacks, and the reason why is because cholesterol lowering drugs don't get to the real reason why you have heart disease, and the real reason why you have it is inflammation. Inflammation can also affect the gastrointestinal system. So this would be what is known as leaky gut. I want you to think about why avoiding food allergies is so important. And the reason why is because really when you look at food allergies, what it's saying is it's saying that these specific foods are not only creating an immune system reaction, which can then start to break down these junctions between the external environment, which is within your gastrointestinal system, and your internal environment, which is actually within your body. Because remember, your stomach and your large intestine is still completely outside of your internal environment, and it needs to stay that way. So as you have an increase of stress and toxicity, drugs, specific pathogens, infections, or a specific organ malfunction like liver malfunction, what that does is that creates inflammation, and that inflammation actually will break down these junctions and then actually allow more of these food particles to be able to seep through, which then will create even more food intolerances and then cause even more immune system issues, ultimately leading to things like autoimmunity. So the goal is that you stop eating these foods and I'll start to address all these other areas so that this part of the gastrointestinal system can start to seal back up so that it will give the immune system a break. And by the way, your gut is responsible for immunity, for a lot of your hormone conversion, 80% to 90% of your serotonin, which is involved in mood and sleep, and even some of your dopamine production, which is responsible for energy and focus and motivation. Inflammation will also affect the liver. You see what a normal healthy liver looks like, and then you look at what is known as a fatty liver. Well, 50 years ago, really the only way for you to have a fatty scarred liver was to be an alcoholic. And now what we're realizing is that there have been people who aren't alcoholics but still have a fatty liver, and this is called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And they've actually said in the United States, 50% of people have it of some level. And one of the biggest causes of fatty liver is inflammation, and the biggest culprit in this inflammation is actually fructose consumption. So fructose, the highest place where we're getting fructose is from high fructose corn syrup, which is directly in our diet. Now the reason why addressing inflammation at the level of the liver, why this is so important, is because a lot of your conversion of your hormones, specifically like thyroid hormone, occurs here. This is also where the body rids itself of toxicity. And so if you are extremely toxic because of a bad lifestyle, and you have a fatty liver, it's going to make it impossible for the body to be able to take those toxins, bind them, and to be able to eliminate them. Another source of inflammation is things like joint pain and arthritis. Now, in order for a joint to break down, for example, first there's got to be some kind of stimulus for it to happen. The number one stimulus is actually going to be alignment. So this is actually where chiropractic comes in, and why it's so important is because we're actually working on correcting alignment issues specifically. And the reason why is this. If you had a car and the wheels went out of alignment, well then those wheels will actually start breaking down faster. Now, the thing is with what you eat and inflammation is that when you are eating foods that are creating inflammation, the inflammation tends to settle in where there's the more likelihood of having an inflammatory response. And you guessed it, the most likely place where you're going to have an inflammatory response in your joints is the ones that are actually going to be misaligned the most. I'll give you a perfect example. When I was 22 years of age, I was diagnosed with a herniated disc down in my lower part of the back. And when I took x-rays on it, it showed that there was severe degeneration in through this area. So basically it looked like this, already at 22 years of age. And now when I would eat foods that would inflame my body, I would always feel it in through the lower part of the back because that area had been damaged and misaligned for so long, is that this will have the highest area of inflammation. So it was almost just like a fly trap to these inflammatory foods. Now, inflammation also affects your hormone system too. So inflammation affects things like thyroid function. Inflammation affects things like uterine function, testicular function, and also ovarian function. And this is why inflammation is linked to things like endometriosis, ovarian cysts, polycystic ovarian syndrome, PMS, thyroid issues, and even adrenal issues, because inflammation interferes with those hormones. And so this is why you want to start avoiding things as much as possible that's creating an inflammatory process. And a great place to start is simply with your food allergies. Now, despite what your food allergies actually say, I always say that generally speaking, there's 4 main ones that I want you to avoid, whether they're on your test or not, in addition to what you're having an IgG or IgE reaction to. Now, most people do in fact respond to casein. And in fact, out of all of the people that we have tested, almost everyone has responded negatively to casein. Now, here's what casein is. Casein is a protein, about 2/3 of the protein in milk and cheese and ice cream or any dairy products. But you also have to understand that there's a lot of food additives that contain casein well, and they are called, for example, sodium caseinate. So really anything that has milk as an ingredient is going to contain casein. So no more pizza, no more cheese, no more ice cream. And what you realize is you start to avoid these, you're actually going to notice that your gastrointestinal system is going to feel a lot better, skin will get better, and you also will lose a lot of chronic inflammation in the joints, as well as people notice that they start to lose a lot of swelling underneath their skin. Now, when you look at casein that comes from cow's milk, this is typically what is known as beta A1 casein. So there's 2 different kinds of caseins that are out there. There's A1 and there's A2 casein. Most dairy is A1, but for example, goat's milk is A2 casein. Now, I generally recommend avoiding both goat's milk and cow's milk for the time being, but as the body begins to heal and repair and improve, people ask, well, can I start to add maybe goat's milk or goat's cheese into my diet? And we say typically yes, but let's give it 3 to 4 months before we even start doing that. Now, what this also means too is this also means to avoid cow's milk in general. And a lot of people do in fact respond to cow's milk, but sometimes not as strongly as casein. Now, what's the difference between cow's milk and casein? Well, when we talk about cow's milk, we talk about the other third of the protein in cow's milk, and that's actually whey. If you remember the nursery rhyme, Little Miss Muffet sat on her tuffet, eating her curds, which is the casein, and whey. So the other third of the protein in cow's milk is going to be whey. So this would be any kind of whey protein. Now, for example, I used to recommend whey protein to a lot of different people, and some people actually responded really well to whey protein, and some people just didn't feel so good when they're on it. And going further down this investigation, we actually say, well, a lot of them were actually having an IgG reaction to, in fact, the whey protein. So what this means is a lot of people will ask the question, well, I like doing smoothies or I like doing protein cut shakes. What does that mean? What do I need to do as an alternative? Well, number one, don't ever have any kind of casein powder, or don't have any kind of whey protein powder either. even if it's grass-fed, even if it's from concentrate, even if there is no hormones in it, even if there is stevia in it, even if it's really natural, we tend, if you have a cow's milk allergy, avoid whey protein. And in general, I'll say it's best to avoid whey protein as well. So a great alternative would be bone broth protein. And in fact, I recommend almost universally beef bone broth protein, unless they have a specific beef allergy, which is going to be not as many people, and in which case we have them actually have a bone broth from chicken. Now, the third one is going to be gluten, and also gluten-like proteins. Now, the protein in wheat, known as gluten, tends to, whether it's showing you're having an IgG reaction to it, it actually tends to kind of beat down the lining of the gastrointestinal system, which can then lead to things like leaky gut. Now, this would also include things like wheat, barley, and also rye. So gluten in general, we just react to, and it tends to create things like leaky gut syndrome just because of the components of gluten. But in addition to that, another reason to avoid wheat is because most wheat that we are consuming here in the United States will contain high levels of Roundup, otherwise known as glyphosate. Reason why is because when wheat has matured, what they do is they'll spray it with Roundup in order to kill it very quickly and help it dry, just so that they can harvest it that much quicker. And the problem with this is that there's never an opportunity for the glyphosate or the Roundup to actually get washed off of the wheat. The glyphosate or Roundup can have really some devastating effects on inside of the body. Not only did the World Health Organization actually say that it was in fact carcinogenic in 2015, but also glyphosate or Roundup can disrupt the gut's microbiome, or the healthy beneficial bacteria that do in fact help with immune system function, and also help to keep that gastrointestinal system lining sealed, so things actually can't seep through to create those immune system reactions. Now, I know that with a lot of people, when they look at their food allergy testing, they may ask the question, they say, well, where on earth do we start? Well, this is one of the reasons why we have a food consultation that we can set up with you, in which we basically take your food allergies and we compare to what you're eating currently, and then we give you healthy replacements in which you don't have a food allergy to. So for example, these are just going to be some flour alternatives that we would share with you, just one of the things to share with you during that food consult. For example, we could say, instead of having regular flour, here's almond flour, cassava flour, coconut flour, tapioca flour, and we can help you pick which one would be the best for you based off of your food allergies and food sensitivities. And then we go through all these other lists and we show you what you should replace them with and where you can actually get them at. It's a great visit because it just calms people down so much, because they come out leaving with a plan on exactly what they need to do. And we found that when they do that, they actually start following through a lot quicker. And some people who actually try to figure it out on their own, 3 months later, they're still trying to figure it out. So this is a great visit to help save you a lot of time and help save you a lot of stress. And even when we do this appointment, just because it can be stressful, because it can be such a big change for so many people, we're not asking you to do keto or paleo, or we're not even asking you, that you need to start losing weight on this. The whole goal is just to get you to eat the same as how you're already eating, but just to start lowering inflammation by eliminating the foods that are creating the inflammation. And then the last one is going to be corn and soy. Reason why is soybeans, for example, again, these are going to be genetically modified, and much of corn is going to be genetically modified that we're consuming in our diet. So genetically modified, the reason why it's bad is because these will automatically contain glyphosate or Roundup. But when you look at soy typically is estrogen producing, and most people are going to get way too much estrogen because they consume estrogen mimickers, they consume too much sugar in the body, and in fact most women are very estrogen dominant, and in fact most men have way too much estrogen too, which is why you see so many men who have dad bods, who have the development of breasts, or have very low testosterone, low energy, and have poor sleep and have low sex drives. The other thing is that soy can be also goitrogenic. It can interfere with thyroid function. And in fact, the only time that I would say that soy would be acceptable in smaller amounts was that if it was actually non-GMO and fermented. Now, what about corn? So corn again is mostly GMO, and the only corn that I would say would be okay for you to have was that if it would be actually organic non-GMO. So like organic non-GMO sweet corn or organic popcorn, for example. Now, most of our fructose consumption actually comes from high fructose corn syrup, and high fructose consumption is directly attributed to this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So again, if you have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, you're going to have a lot of problems with hormone conversion, and you're going to also become toxic as a result. Now, with corn, many times you don't even really digest it very well. And I'll give you an example. If you've ever been at a summertime cookout and you had a lot of sweet corn, well, you actually notice that you actually will see the sweet corn in your stool 1 to 2 days later. So this corn also contains a lot of cellulose, which makes it not very digestible in the first place. So what do we do beyond the food allergy tests? So, some people who don't have a lot of health issues or they don't have a lot of fires in regards to their health, sometimes the food allergy test is really the only thing that we need to do, particularly with kids, for example. The next step would be to get a nutrition consult. Well, we're going to show you how to replace your food that you're allergic to with other options, and we really try to keep it similar to what you're eating as close as possible, and then we can always work on nutrition a little bit later. But then for a lot of people, obviously, this is just maybe a starting point in which what we may need to do is not only do the nutrition consult, but then just continue to do consults in which we're doing some additional testing, continuing to uncover what some of these causes are, and then always be able to change as far as what we're recommending with things like supplements or foods and things like that to make sure that we're helping the body be able to heal and recover so that we're going towards this homeostasis or this balance within the body. Again, the body is actually designed to be within balance and homeostasis, and when it gets knocked out of homeostasis because of all of these interferences, well, it tries to do its best to try to adapt to these things, and this is where you start to see this disease process and these changes in some of these lab tests start to occur. So here's some of the other tests that we may or may not recommend. Now, certainly we're not going to be recommending all of them, but when we recommend additional testing, it's really to look and investigate further to see, okay, where could some of these issues actually be coming from? A great test would be a comprehensive stool test. Remember, health begins in the nerve system, but also in the gut. And so by looking in your stool can give us an idea of what's happening in the gastrointestinal system. So we can actually look for your microbiome. So what are some of the expected or beneficial bacteria that are in there? Do we have any overgrowths? What are some of the imbalanced bacteria that are in your gastrointestinal system? Or what are the ones that are actually creating a lot of dysfunction that are very imbalanced? And we can also look for things like fungal infections, yeast infections, parasites. We can also look and see how the immune system is actually functioning. We can also see like how much the food is actually getting digested in the gastrointestinal system. So it actually gives us a great indicator of actually like what's happening as the body is taking this food as it goes from the mouth all the way down to the south end of your gastrointestinal system. Another test might be a cardiometabolic profile. Now, if we're recommending any cardiometabolic profile, this is going to be much more in-depth than what your medical doctor is recommending. And the reason why is many of the tests aren't actually uncovering any of the reasons why you might have blood sugar issues or why you might have any kind of cardiovascular disease, high cholesterol, or high blood pressure. So some of the additional things that we have on the cardiometabolic profile are going to be testing your insulin levels, which will actually be higher before you'll have high blood sugar. Looking at homocysteine. Your homocysteine is an inflammatory marker inside of your body, which is actually a better predictor of cardiovascular disease than your cholesterol levels. We're looking at things like A1C, which is also a diabetes marker. We're also looking at things like adiponectin, which is basically your body's ability to burn fat as an energy source. We're also looking at leptin, which is your hunger hormone. We're looking at your triglycerides, how much free fat you have in your cardiovascular system. We're also looking at, yes, cholesterol, but we're also looking at additional things, for example, like cholesterol particle size. This is absolutely critical because cholesterol particle size is even more important than how much cholesterol you have. The smaller these particle size, the more likely they are to actually be able to go underneath the lining of the blood vessels and then create this inflammatory response that is in fact creating these blockages within the arteries. So this will be a lot more in detail on what we need to do in order to tackle some of these issues in regards to high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or type 2 diabetes, or even insulin resistance. Other tests that we can do are blood tests that involve having a full thyroid panel and also with female hormones as well. Now, the full thyroid panel that we have is going to give us much more information than a general panel that your MD does. Usually they only are looking for things like T3, T4, and thyroid stimulating hormone. However, when we're doing this full panel, this will give us a lot better indication of why the thyroid is not working the way that it's supposed to. Is it a conversion issue? Is it just a production issue? Is it an autoimmune issue? Or is there some kind of interference that's taking place inside the body that's blocking any kind of production or conversion issues inside of the body? And in addition to that, we always will run cortisol, because anyone who is on Synthroid, there is absolutely contraindicated to be on Synthroid if they actually have it known as what is adrenal insufficiency. Other times we will call it adrenal fatigue. Now, the Dutch hormone test will look at all of the different estrogens, all of the different progesterones, and all of the different intermediaries that are taking place. This really helps us to look at the whole sex hormone pathway from start to finish and identify where some of these conversions are actually going wrong. This is also a great test for men. Many times women come to me and they'll say, you got to help me with my man, you got to help me with my husband. You know, he has no motivation, he doesn't sleep well, has no energy, and has no sex drive. Well, this helps us to see, in fact, why this is actually happening. And in fact, men's testosterone is down 40% since the 1970s. There has to be a reason why. It can be sugar, it can be high adipose or high fat tissue, it can be stress, it can be some other issues that are taking place as well. And so this helps us to actually narrow it down and see why these hormones aren't converting into other hormones. Now, these tests we won't run very often on people. However, you know, sometimes we might see that there's some really hidden underlying things that we need to investigate further. These panels are actually things like cancer panels, looking for some underlying viral issues that are taking place, and even doing autoimmune panels. For example, this would be, you know, the Epstein-Barr virus is for chronic fatigue. So you can actually see that this person has a chronic fatigue virus that's affecting the immune system. We also can actually look at things like C4A level. These things can actually indicate possible mold toxicity is taking place, or even Lyme. Tumor markers are really great because they help us to see, well, hey, what's going on with this person who might have cancer? Is it actually spreading? Is this cancer progressing? So people who have had cancer in the past, these are great tumor markers because they can actually see if they're elevated, that the cancer can actually be progressing, or the cancer can actually be spreading before it will actually even show up on things like CAT scan. This is also a test to look at your CD4 and CD8 count, which is a great snapshot of what's happening to the immune system. You know, looking at these things is basically saying, how's the immune system functioning inside of the body? And then finally, neurotransmitters tests. So neurotransmitter tests are a great test for people who are having issues with sleep or energy or mood, or maybe children with ADD or ADHD. The reason why this test is great is because this helps us to see how these specific neurotransmitters are being produced in the body. Remember, the brain makes very little of these neurotransmitters, and in fact, the brain is really just the receiver of these neurotransmitters that are getting produced inside the body. For example, serotonin is actually 90% of it is made in the gut, in the gastrointestinal system. So if someone has very low serotonin, we have to assume, listen, there's some kind of inflammatory process that's occurring in the gut. GABA, which is short for gamma aminobutyric acid. This is produced in the pancreas. This is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. This actually allows the brain to calm down. Dopamine is responsible for things like motivation. This is like when you consume chocolate and you feel really good. This is actually the dopamine that's speaking to your brain. So dopamine is made, a lot of it in the gut, in the brainstem, and it's also produced in the adrenal glands. Norepinephrine and epinephrine, these things are going to be produced in your adrenal glands and in your central nerve system. These are specifically, these can, when we look at this, can really help us to see that this person is in a very high excitatory, high stress type state. And then finally, glutamate. So glutamate is actually an excitatory neurotransmitter. You know this if you've ever heard of monosodium glutamate, or MSG. So very excitatory within the brain. And in fact, high levels can actually mean, because this is produced in the immune system, this can mean that there could be a very chronic infection that the body is actually fighting. So you can see that these neurotransmitters give us a really good idea of what's happening in the body as well. So this is really what the timeline is for every single person on what we do in order to obviously get them well. Obviously, while we're doing this, there's always chiropractic care involved, always working on, again, that spine and the nerve system, that big wheel in that Swiss watch principle, because having a healthy spine, having a healthy nerve system is actually one of the biggest things, because you're going to need healthy neurology, but you're also going to have the least amount of stress on the body as possible. So phase one, though, is we're working on reducing inflammation. So working on avoiding our food sensitivities, finding those replacements, and then getting some additional testing as far as how we need to start uncovering where some of these causes are coming from. And then we will recommend specific herbs and supplements, maybe to help with digestion, or maybe to help calm the central nerve system, or start to lower the inflammation inside of the body. So these might be things like digestive enzymes or hydrochloric acid to help with digestion. We also may be doing things like California poppy, or maybe CBD oil, in order to help calm the central nerve system down, or things like turmeric to help lower inflammation inside of the body. And then so reduce the inflammation, begin the repair process, and then eventually leading into this whole detox. And the reason why we want to be able to take everyone through a detox over 30 days is we have to really start addressing these phase 1, phase 2 detoxification pathways, because remember, when it comes to hormones specifically, this conversion is taking place in the liver. So not only do we need hormone conversion, but to also rid the body of toxicity that keeps perpetuating and driving inflammation. And then after that, begin rebuilding the body, so that we're rebuilding these hormone pathways, and changing out different types of supplements and herbs to help aid in hormone production, and then finally starting to support those hormones, and then retesting. So retesting, stool if we need to, retesting hormones again, or your inflammatory markers, or retesting on your cardiometabolic panel. And many times, the last thing that we would ever retest would be your food allergies. And typically we recommend retesting food allergies within 1 year, at about the 1 year point, and then retesting after that every 2 years. The main goal is that if we can teach you what is actually causing it, we start working on the causes, and we're teaching you actually how to take care of yourself, then the goal is that I should be able to see you less and less. And also is that you shouldn't have to take tons of supplements for the rest of your lives. And if you are addressing these things, then you shouldn't have to be on 10 to 12 different supplements the rest of your life. Because again, if you are on 10 to 12 supplements and you stop taking them for 2 or 3 weeks and you get sick again, then ultimately what you're doing is it's a better approach, but it's still just a natural band-aid as far as why you're sick. And in fact, the only reason why you should be on a lot of supplements for the rest of your life is only because you're choosing to continue to create inflammation, or maybe sometimes you'll have to go on some of them for a short time because you might have an unusually high amount of stress at the time, or you may also be in some kind of emergency situation. So the real goal is that we're taking you step by step throughout this whole process, uncovering causes to help you restore and regain your health, so that at the end, that you feel great, that you have high energy, that you sleep well, that the body is very healthy, the immune system is well, it's highly adaptable, and that you're enjoying the best health that you've ever enjoyed. So I hope this makes sense to you regarding your food allergies, food sensitivities, and where we should be going from here.